The perfect consensus. Ambassador Kieran Voss stood before the crystalline assembly, trying not to let his frustration show. Around him, the council chamber of the Synthari gleamed with bioluminescent panels that pulsed in perfect synchronization, a visual representation of their infamous unity. Your proposal has been considered, High Arbiter Zelphine announced, her voice harmonizing with the 17 other council members in a way that made Kieran's skin crawl. They spoke as one entity, their words overlapping in eerie precision. We find it incomplete. Kieran had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Confluence for 3 months now, and every single negotiation with the Synthari had ended the same way. The species prided themselves on achieving absolute consensus before making any decision. No dissent. No debate. Just agreement. With respect, High Arbiter, Kieran began, carefully choosing his words, humanity has offered a trade route that would benefit both our species. We're asking for passage through the Tertian Corridor, and in exchange we're offering advanced agricultural techniques that could increase your food production by 40%. The council members tilted their heads in unison, their silver eyes blinking simultaneously. It was like watching 18 synchronized swimmers perform on dry land. The benefit is acknowledged, they intoned together. However, 7,412 variables must align before consensus can be achieved. We calculate an 87% probability that full agreement will be reached in 4.3 standard years. Kieran felt his jaw tighten. 4 years. For a simple trade agreement. Behind the Synthari Council, holographic displays showed their civilization's achievements. Cities that functioned with zero crime, resource distribution with zero waste, technological advancement that proceeded in lockstep across their entire empire. They had eliminated conflict by eliminating disagreement itself. May I ask, Kieran ventured, what variables are preventing consensus now? Council member Thrain has a probability index of 0.97 regarding favorable outcomes, Zelphine explained, her voice still perfectly synchronized with her colleagues. Council member Vorix maintains a 0.96 probability index. Council member Helsing projects 0.95. Until all indices reach unity at 1.0, we cannot proceed. Kieran stared at them. You're telling me that a difference of 3 to 5%, spread across your entire council, is preventing this agreement? Correct. Disharmony cannot be tolerated. In the observation gallery above, Kieran spotted his colleague, Dr. Mara Okonkwo, furiously taking notes. Beside her sat Jax Remington, the Confluence's human military advisor, his scarred face twisted in barely concealed disgust. Kieran took a deep breath. What if I told you that human civilization was built on disagreement? The synchronized head tilt again. We are aware of your species' unfortunate tendency toward conflict. It is why your application for Tier 2 status has been delayed. Humanity's internal divisions are well documented. That's not what I mean, Kieran said, warming to his subject. What if I told you that our greatest achievements came not from perfect agreement, but from the clash of different ideas? Impossible, the council declared. Progress requires unity. Conflict produces only destruction. Kieran glanced up at Mara, who nodded encouragingly. They discussed this possibility, that the Synthari's legendary unity might actually be their greatest weakness. Then let me propose something, Kieran said. A demonstration. Give me 1 month to show you how humanity makes decisions. Let me bring a human council here to negotiate a simple matter in front of you. If we can reach an agreement faster than your projected 4 years, perhaps you'll consider alternative methods. The Synthari Council fell silent, their bioluminescent panels flickering in calculation. For the first time the synchronization wavered, just slightly. Some panels pulsed faster than others. This proposal is unprecedented, Zelphine finally said, though now Kieran noticed micro-delays between the council members' words. We must achieve consensus on whether to observe your demonstration. How long will that take? Kieran asked. 7 standard days. Kieran smiled. It was the fastest decision they'd ever made. 1 week later, Kieran received the authorization. The Synthari would observe a human council in action. As he walked through the corridors of the Confluence station, he contacted Mara on his communicator. They agreed, he said. Now we just need to assemble the most argumentative, stubborn, brilliant humans we can find. Mara's laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh, I've already got the perfect candidates. Trust me, Kieran. If anyone can teach the Synthari about productive disagreement, it's this bunch. Though I warn you, you might regret this. Kieran looked out at the stars, at the vast Synthari empire that stretched across 12 systems, all functioning in perfect, stifling harmony. Regret? Mara, we're about to introduce the concept of democracy to a species that thinks differing by 3% is catastrophic. What could possibly go wrong? The answer he would soon learn was, everything. And that would be exactly the point. The Chaos Council. The conference room that Kieran had requisitioned was designed for dignified diplomatic proceedings. Soft lighting, ergonomic chairs arranged in a perfect circle, translation devices humming quietly in the background. He'd imagined calm, measured discussions that would demonstrate human rationality. What he got instead was barely controlled pandemonium. Absolutely not. Dr. Chin Matsumoto slammed her hand on the table, her dark eyes flashing. We're not starting with infrastructure. Education is the foundation of everything. Across from her, Commander Rashid Aladil leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Both of you are missing the obvious. Without security protocols, your infrastructure crumbles and your schools become targets. Oh, perfect, muttered Yuki Nakamura, the civilian representative from New Kyoto Colony. The military man wants to militarize everything. What a shock. Kieran watched from the corner as the 5-person Human Advisory Council he'd assembled continued their first meeting. Beside him, Dr. Mara Okonkwo was grinning like someone watching their favorite sports team, while Jax Remington looked like he was developing a migraine. In the observation booth above, invisible but certainly watching, sat the entire Synthari crystalline assembly. Maybe this was a mistake, Kieran whispered to Mara. Are you kidding? This is perfect, she whispered back. Look at them go. The 5th member of the Human Council, Dr. Amara Osei, an economist from the African Union, raised her hand calmly. Perhaps we could establish some ground rules? Ground rules? Yuki snorted. We've been here for 10 minutes. How much chaos could we possibly? I counted 17 interruptions in the past 3 minutes, said the final council member, Professor Dmitry Volkov, a systems analyst from Mars Colony. His precise, accented voice cut through the noise. At this rate, we will accomplish nothing. That's rich, coming from someone whose opening statement was, everyone here is wrong, Chin shot back. I said your approaches were incomplete, Dmitry corrected. That is objectively different from being wrong. Rashid laughed, a deep booming sound. I'm starting to like you, Professor. Kieran decided it was time to intervene. He stepped forward, and the room gradually quieted, though Chin and Yuki continued a heated whispered argument about resource allocation. Ladies, gentlemen, Kieran began, I've brought you here for a specific purpose. The Synthari believe that disagreement is a flaw. That progress can only happen through perfect consensus. Your job is to show them otherwise. By arguing? Amara asked, one elegant eyebrow raised. By solving a problem, Kieran corrected. I'm going to present you with a scenario. You have 1 week to develop a solution. The Synthari predict it would take them 18 months to reach consensus on the same issue. He activated the holographic display. A planet appeared, rotating slowly. Colony world designated Epsilon 7, Kieran explained. Population, 50,000. Problem: they've discovered deposits of quantrium, extremely valuable, extremely dangerous to mine. They need to decide whether to exploit the resource, how to do it safely if they proceed, how to distribute the profits, and how to handle the environmental impact. The colony is deadlocked, with 4 major factions in complete disagreement. Classic, Rashid murmured. Your task, Kieran continued, is to develop a comprehensive recommendation for Epsilon 7 that addresses all stakeholder concerns. You have full access to data, experts, and simulation software. The Synthari will be watching and analyzing your process. Chin leaned forward. What's the catch? The catch, Mara interjected, is that you 5 were selected because you represent fundamentally different philosophies. Dr. Matsumoto, you're a hardcore progressive who believes in radical change. Commander Aladil, you're a pragmatic conservative who trusts traditional structures. Ms. Nakamura, you're a libertarian who prioritizes individual freedom. Dr. Osei, you're a communitarian who emphasizes collective welfare. And Professor Volkov, you're a technocrat who believes in data-driven solutions. So we're guaranteed to disagree, Dmitry observed. Exactly, Kieran said. But somehow humanity has been making decisions with people like you in the room for thousands of years. And despite all the arguing, all the disagreement, all the compromise, we've reached the stars. Above them, invisible in their observation booth, the Synthari Council watched with what could only be described as horrified fascination. Their bioluminescent panels flickered in confused patterns as they tried to calculate the probability of this chaos producing anything useful. High arbiter Zelfine's probability index was fluctuating wildly. This was unprecedented. Back in the conference room, Yuki was pulling up data on her tablet. Okay, so if we're actually doing this, I need to know the exact quantium quantities, the technological capability of the colony, and their current political structure. And the environmental baseline, Chin added, her antagonism temporarily forgotten in the face of the actual problem. We need ecosystem analysis going back at least 20 years. Security assessment of the mining operation, Rashid said. If this stuff is as dangerous as Voss says, we need to know what happens if something goes wrong. Amara was already pulling up economic models. Distribution formulas will be critical. If the profits aren't handled fairly, we'll create more problems than we solve. Dimitri's fingers flew across his holographic keyboard. I will construct a decision matrix incorporating all variables. We can weight each factor according to our collective priorities. Who decides the weights? Chin challenged. We do, Dimitri replied. Through discussion and compromise. Compromise? Yuki repeated, testing the word. You realize that's just a fancy way of saying nobody gets what they want, right? Rashid smiled. No, young lady. Compromise means everybody gets something they need, even if it's not everything they want. There's a difference. Kiran exchanged a glance with Mara. This was actually working? All right, Chin said, standing up. I propose we break into research teams for the next 12 hours. Reconvene tomorrow morning with preliminary findings. We can fight about the details then. Seconded, Amara said. All in favor? Kiran asked, more out of habit than necessity. 5 hands went up, some more reluctantly than others. Motion carries, Kiran declared, trying to hide his smile. As the council members filed out, already forming smaller groups and continuing their debates, Jack sidled up to Kiran. You know they're going to eat each other alive before the week is out, the military advisor said. Maybe, Kiran agreed. Or maybe they'll show the Synthari something they've never seen before. What's that? That the path from chaos to consensus is where all the good ideas live. Above them, the Synthari Council sat in absolute silence, their probability matrices unable to predict what would happen next. For the first time in 3,000 years of recorded history, the Synthari felt something they had no word for. Uncertainty. The value of discord. By day 3, the Synthari observation booth had become the most popular destination on the Confluence station. Council members from other species crowded in to watch the human experiment, placing bets on when the whole thing would collapse into violence. The Dravik's ambassador, a reptilian diplomat named Sethrak, chittered with amusement. I give them another day before the small female throws something at the military one. High Arbiter Zelfine didn't respond. She was too busy trying to process what she was witnessing. Down in the conference room, the Human Advisory Council was in full session. The table was covered with data pads, half-empty coffee cups, and what appeared to be hand-drawn diagrams on actual paper, a human affectation that the Synthari found charmingly primitive. Your numbers are off, Chin said, pointing at Amara's economic projection. You're assuming steady-state extraction, but quantium deposits don't work that way. The yield degrades over time. I accounted for that, Amara replied calmly, pulling up a secondary spreadsheet. See? Degradation curve factored in with a 15% annual decline. Chin studied the numbers then nodded. Okay, good. But that means we need to front-load the infrastructure investment, which affects Dimitri's timeline. Already adjusted, Dimitri called from across the room where he was working on his decision matrix. Though I must point out that Commander Aladil's security protocols will delay initial operations by approximately 40 days. Rashid looked up from his safety assessment. You want to cut corners on security? I want to optimize efficiency, Dimitri corrected. Efficiency means nothing if the whole operation blows up and kills people, Yuki interjected. I may be a libertarian, but even I draw the line at preventable deaths. Zelfine leaned forward in the observation booth. They are agreeing, she whispered to her fellow council members. But they were arguing yesterday about these same points. Not agreeing, corrected council member Thrain, one of the few Synthari who had shown interest in human psychology. They are, what is the human word? Negotiating. Each party yields on some points to gain acceptance on others. But how do they decide what to yield? Another council member asked. Where is their consensus algorithm? There is no algorithm, Thrain said, his bioluminescent panels flickering with something that might have been excitement. They are making it up as they proceed. Back in the conference room, Mara was documenting everything, her academic mind racing. This was groundbreaking research on collective human decision-making, and it was playing out right in front of her. All right, Shin said, standing up and stretching. Let's talk about the big one. Distribution of profits. This is where things get ugly. Why ugly? Amara asked, though her slight smile suggested she knew exactly why. Because it's the one thing we fundamentally disagree on, Yuki said. Rashid wants it controlled by a centralized colonial authority. Amara wants equal distribution to all colonists. I want a free market approach where miners get the bulk of profits. Chin wants it all funneled into social programs. And Dimitri probably wants to give it to an AI to manage. That is not inaccurate, Dimitri admitted. Rashid laughed. At least we're honest about our biases. So how do we solve it? Chin asked, and Kieran noticed that her tone had changed. There was no anger now, just genuine curiosity. We look at what each approach is trying to achieve, Amara suggested. Not the mechanism but the goal. Rashid, why do you want centralized control? The commander considered this. Stability. Fairness. Making sure nobody gets left behind or exploited. And I want equal distribution for the same reason, Amara said. Different mechanism, same goal. Yuki crossed her arms. I want market distribution because I think people should be rewarded for their effort and risk. The miners are doing dangerous work. But the colony as a whole is taking on risk by allowing the mining, Shin countered. They're risking environmental damage, social disruption, potential catastrophe. Shouldn't they be compensated? Yes, Yuki admitted. That's actually fair. Dimitri had been quiet, his fingers steepled in thought. What if, he said slowly, we are approaching this incorrectly? What if instead of choosing one distribution method, we implement a hybrid system? Keep talking, Rashid said. Observe, Dimitri pulled up a new hologram. Tier 1, 30% of gross profits go to colonial infrastructure and social programs, Chin and Amara's concern. Tier 2, 40% distributed as dividends to all colonists equally, Amara's democratic principle. Tier 3, 25% to the miners and direct workers, Yuki's merit-based incentive. Tier 4, 5% held in emergency reserves under colonial authority oversight, Rashid's security concern. The room fell silent as they all studied the proposal. That's actually not terrible, Yuki said finally. It gives everyone something, Shin admitted. Though I'd want the social program percentage higher. 35 and 35? Amara suggested. 5% from the equal distribution to social programs? But that penalizes everyone for the benefit of programs they might not use, Yuki objected. What if, Rashid interjected, colonists can vote on how that 5% is allocated? Some to education, some to healthcare, some to environmental protection, based on what the community actually wants. Chen's eyes lit up. Participatory budgeting. I can work with that. Up in the observation booth, Zelphine felt her probability indices spinning wildly. They are creating a new solution. One that none of them initially proposed. Impossible, another council member stated. Conflicting viewpoints cannot produce synthesis. And yet, Thrain said quietly, watch. Down below, the Human Council was now working together, refining Dimitri's hybrid model. They still disagreed, loudly, frequently, but each disagreement seemed to sharpen the solution rather than derail it. We need environmental oversight, Chin insisted. Independent monitors. Agreed, said Yuki, surprising everyone. But they need to be accountable too. Regular audits, public reporting. I can draft that framework, Amara offered. And I can design the security protocols around it, Rashid added. Kieran watched in amazement as the 5 people who couldn't agree on anything 3 days ago were now building something together. Something none of them could have created alone. Jax appeared beside him. Okay, the military advisor admitted, I didn't think this would work. Neither did I, Kieran confessed. But look at them. They're not trying to eliminate disagreement. They're using it. Every objection makes the plan stronger. The Synthari must be having collective fits up there, Mara said with a grin. She wasn't wrong. In the observation booth, the crystalline assembly was experiencing something unprecedented. Divided opinions about what they were witnessing. Some council members saw only chaos. Others saw possibility. And for the first time in Synthari history, they weren't sure how to resolve the difference. The perfect unity was beginning to crack. The revelation. On day 5, something unexpected happened. The Synthari requested to ask questions. Kieran received the formal communication from High Arbiter Zelphine with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. In 3 months of diplomatic relations, the Synthari had never asked humans to explain anything. They simply calculated probabilities until consensus emerged. This was different. This was curiosity. The Human Advisory Council was taking a break when Zelphine and 3 other council members materialized in the doorway. Their bioluminescent panels pulsed in synchronized patterns, though Kieran noticed the rhythm wasn't quite as perfect as before. "We wish to understand," Zelphine announced, her voice still harmonized with her companions but with subtle variations he'd never heard. "Councilmember Chin, you stated yesterday that Commander Aladil's security protocol was overbuilt and paranoid. Yet today you incorporated it into your environmental safety framework. This is contradictory." Chin looked up from her coffee, startled by the direct address. She exchanged glances with the others before answering. "It's not contradictory," she said carefully. "I still think Rashid's initial approach was too heavy-handed. But when I actually listened to why he wanted those protocols, when he explained the failure scenarios he's seen in military operations, I realized he had a point. I didn't agree with his solution, but I understood his concern. So we adapted it." Listened. Zelphine's panels flickered in confusion. "But listening does not change fundamental positions. Your probability index regarding security protocols should have remained constant." "Probability index?" Rashid chuckled. "High Arbiter, I don't have a probability index. I have opinions, and opinions can change when you get new information." "But change creates instability," another Synthari Council member said. "If your positions shift, how do you reach consensus?" "We don't," Yuki said bluntly. "We reach compromise. It's different." Dimitri stood up and approached the Synthari, his analytical mind already understanding what they were struggling with. "May I ask, High Arbiter, what is your current probability index regarding the Epsilon 7 mining situation?" Zelphine's panels pulsed. "I have 17 different probability indices, each addressing different aspects of the problem. My index for environmental safety is 0.94. For economic viability, 0.87. For social stability, 0.91. For—" "Stop," Dimitri interrupted gently. "You have 17 different concerns, each with different levels of certainty." "Yes. Correct. And you will not make a decision until all 17 indices reach 1.0, perfect certainty, in harmony with all other council members' indices? That is the Synthari way." Dimitri gestured to the Human Council. "We do not seek perfect certainty because perfect certainty does not exist. Commander Aladil is perhaps 70% certain his security protocols are optimal. Dr. Chin is 60% certain her environmental framework is sufficient. But together, when we combine our partial certainties and address each other's concerns, we reach a solution we are collectively 85% confident in. That is enough to proceed." "But what of the 15% uncertainty?" Zelphine asked. "We account for it," Amara said, joining the conversation. "We build in flexibility, monitoring systems, and adjustment mechanisms. We accept that we might need to modify our approach as we learn more." The Synthari Council members' panels began flickering in what could only be described as agitation. This concept seemed to cause them genuine distress. "You plan to be wrong?" Zelphine's voice had lost some of its harmonic quality, becoming almost individual. "We plan for the possibility of being wrong," Chin corrected. "There's a difference. Look, High Arbiter, can I show you something?" Without waiting for an answer, Chin pulled up her personal notes from the past 5 days. The Synthari leaned in, their luminescent eyes scanning the data. "Day 1, I wanted to reject the entire mining operation," Chin explained. "Too risky, too damaging. My certainty level on that position? 95%. But then Amara showed me economic projections of what happens to Epsilon 7 if they don't develop the Quantrium deposits. Food insecurity, medical supply shortages, eventual colony failure. My certainty dropped to 80%. She scrolled through her notes. Then Dimitri demonstrated how modern extraction technology could minimize environmental impact. 70%. Then Rashid explained how proper security could prevent the catastrophic failures I was worried about. 60%. Then Yuki argued that colonists should have the right to decide their own economic future. 50%. You decreased your certainty? Zelphine asked, horrified. You became less sure? I became less sure I was right, Chin said. But more sure we could find a better answer together. By day 3 I was 30% certain we should reject the mining operation entirely. And you know what? That's when the real work began. Because I wasn't defending a position anymore. I was solving a problem. Mara, watching from the corner, furiously documented this exchange. This was the breakthrough moment she'd been hoping for. Yuki stood up and walked over to face the Centauri directly. Hi Arbiter, can I ask you something personal? Zelphine's panels dimmed slightly, uncertainty, Kirin realized. You may ask. Have you ever been wrong? The question hung in the air. The Centauri Council members looked at each other, their bioluminescent patterns falling completely out of sync for the first time since Kirin had met them. Define wrong, Zelphine finally said. Have you ever made a decision, reached perfect consensus, implemented a policy, and then discovered it didn't work as intended? Yuki pressed. The silence stretched. Yes, Zelphine admitted quietly, and her voice was hers alone. No harmony, no synchronization. 417 standard years ago, the Crystalline Assembly achieved perfect consensus on an agricultural optimization program. Every council member's probability indices reached 1.0. We were certain. What happened? Rashid asked gently. 3 million Centauri died in the resulting famine, another council member said, his voice also breaking from the group harmony. We had optimized for maximum yield but failed to account for a crop disease that our monoculture approach made catastrophic. We had not disagreed enough. We had not tested our assumptions. The room fell silent. The weight of that admission hung heavy in the air. How did you respond? Amara asked softly. We refined our consensus process, Zelphine said. We added more variables, more probability calculations, more time to reach agreement. We made certainty our shield against ever being that wrong again. But you're still wrong sometimes, Chin said. It wasn't a question. Less frequently, Zelphine defended. Our error rate has decreased by 47% since implementing enhanced consensus protocols. At what cost? Dimitri asked. How much have you decreased your decision-making speed? Your ability to respond to unexpected situations? Your innovation rate? Zelphine's panels flickered, and Kirin saw something he'd never expected to see from a Centauri: doubt. I do not have those calculations readily available, she admitted. Because you've been optimizing for certainty instead of effectiveness, Dimitri said. It wasn't cruel, just analytical. You've built a system that can't be wrong because it barely moves. You've achieved unity by eliminating the very disagreement that would make you stronger. Mara stepped forward, her voice carrying the warmth of a teacher rather than the challenge of a debater. High Arbiter, humanity has been wrong more times than we can count. We've had catastrophic failures, devastating wars, horrific mistakes. But we're still here. We're still growing. Do you know why? Why? Zelphine asked, and Kirin heard genuine curiosity in her voice. Because we fail fast, learn faster, and we never, ever, assume we have all the answers. Our councils fight because fighting tests ideas. Our disagreements are features, not bugs. And our compromises aren't weakness, they're the strongest solutions we can build because they've survived the crucible of different perspectives. The Centauri Council members stood in silence, their bioluminescent panels now pulsing in completely individual patterns. No synchronization, no harmony. Just 17 beings thinking their own thoughts. We would like, Zelphine said slowly, to observe the rest of your process. Not from the booth. Here. In the room. Rashid grinned. Welcome to democracy, High Arbiter. Fair warning, it's messy. I am beginning, Zelphine replied, her panels brightening, to understand that messy might be the point. The first descent. The Centauri observers sat along the wall of the conference room like students in an alien classroom, their bioluminescent panels absorbing every detail. Kirin noticed they'd stopped synchronizing entirely. Each council member's patterns were unique now, flickering in individual rhythms of thought. It was the 6th day, and the Human Advisory Council was conducting their final review before presenting their Epsilon 7 recommendation. Tensions were high. The environmental monitoring clause is too weak, Chin insisted, pulling up her data for the 3rd time that hour. Annual reviews aren't enough. We need quarterly assessments at minimum. Quarterly reviews would cost the colony an additional 200,000 credits per year, Amara countered, her economic models projected in the air between them. That's money that could fund education or healthcare. What good is education if the ecosystem collapses? Chin shot back. Yuki groaned. We've been over this 17 times. Can we please just vote and move on? No, Rashid said firmly. Chin has a legitimate concern. If we're wrong about the environmental impact, the whole colony suffers. Zelphine watched this exchange with fascination. her panels pulsing in patterns Thrain had identified as intense curiosity. She raised a tentative hand, a gesture she'd learned from watching the humans. "May I ask a question?" she ventured. "Of course," Kieran said. "If you cannot agree on this point, how will you reach a decision? Will you delay until consensus is achieved?" Dimitri laughed, but not unkindly. "No, High Arbiter. We will likely vote. Majority rules. But that means some of you will lose?" Zelphine's voice rose in concern. "Your position will be rejected?" "Maybe," Chin said. "Or maybe we'll find another compromise. Watch." She turned to Amara. "What if we do annual comprehensive reviews, but with quarterly targeted monitoring of the 3 highest risk indicators? Lower cost than full quarterly reviews, but catches problems faster than waiting a full year." Amara pulled up her calculator, fingers flying. "That would cost approximately 75,000 per year. More manageable." She paused, then added, "But we'd need clear protocols for what triggers escalation from targeted to comprehensive monitoring." "I can draft that," Rashid offered. "Based on the safety protocols we already developed. And I want independent verification of the monitoring data," Yuki added. "If we're spending colony money on this, the results need to be public and transparent." Chin considered, then nodded slowly. "Okay. I can live with that." "You can live with that?" Another Synthari observer leaned forward. "Your certainty level has not reached 1.0? Probably sitting at about 75%, Chin admitted. "But combined with everyone else's expertise and concerns, I trust this solution enough to support it." "But you still believe you are partially correct that it is insufficient," the Synthari pressed. "Yes," Chin said simply. "And I might be right. Which is why we built in monitoring and adjustment mechanisms. If I'm right and problems emerge, we can escalate. If I'm wrong and the quarterly targeted monitoring is overkill, we can scale back. The plan breathes." Zelphine stood abruptly, her panels flashing in agitation. "This is uncomfortable. You are accepting a solution you believe may be inadequate." "I'm accepting a solution that everyone can support and that we can adjust," Chin corrected. "That's not the same thing." "But the discomfort," Zelphine began, "is part of the process," Mara interjected from her observation post. "High Arbiter, can I ask, when you reach perfect consensus, how does it feel?" Zelphine's panel steadied into a smooth, calm pattern. "It feels complete, harmonious. There is no discord, no uncertainty, no conflict. It is peaceful." "It sounds boring as hell," Jax muttered, earning a sharp look from Kieran. But Zelphine's panels brightened. "Boring? No, it is efficient. Optimal." "Is it though?" Yuki challenged. "You've been watching us for 6 days. Has anything we've done been optimal?" "No," Zelphine admitted. "Your process is chaotic, inefficient, and emotionally taxing." "And yet," Dimitri said, pulling up their final proposal, "we are about to present a comprehensive solution to the Epsilon 7 situation that addresses environmental, economic, security, social, and technological concerns. It took us 6 days. How long would it have taken your crystalline assembly?" Zelphine consulted her internal calculations. "For a problem of this complexity with this many variables, 18 months to achieve full consensus." "And would your solution be better than ours?" Rashid asked. The question hung in the air. Zelphine looked at the holographic display showing the Human Council's proposal. Tiered profit distribution. Hybrid monitoring systems. Flexible security protocols. Democratic oversight. Environmental safeguards with built-in adjustment mechanisms. I do not know," Zelphine said quietly. "We have never completed such an analysis to compare." "Why not?" Chin asked. "Because we have never needed to," another Synthari observer said, his voice carrying a defensive edge that Kieran had never heard from their species. "Our system works." "Does it?" Amara asked gently. "You told us yesterday about the famine. 400 years ago, you failed catastrophically because you reached perfect consensus on a flawed plan. How many smaller failures have you had since then? Not famines, but suboptimal outcomes that you never recognized because you were certain you were right?" The Synthari fell silent. Thrain, who had been observing quietly, finally spoke. "There was the Tertian corridor dispute. We achieved perfect consensus that the trade route should remain closed to preserve neutrality. It took us 8 years to reach that decision." "And?" Kieran prompted. "And by the time we decided, the geopolitical situation had changed so dramatically that our decision was obsolete before we implemented it," Thrain admitted. "We had optimized for a reality that no longer existed. How often does that happen? Mara asked, her researcher instincts fully engaged. Zelphine's panels dimmed. I have never calculated that metric. Maybe you should, Yuki said. Because I'm guessing it happens a lot. The universe doesn't wait for consensus. Rashid stood and walked over to the Synthari observers. His imposing figure might have been intimidating, but his voice was kind. High Arbiter, do you know what the hardest part of leadership is? Achieving consensus? Zelphine guessed. No. It's accepting that you'll never have all the answers, making the best decision you can with incomplete information, and living with the consequences. He gestured to the Human Council. Every person in this room has made decisions they regret. We've been wrong. We've failed. And we carry those experiences with us. That sounds painful, Zelphine observed. It is, Rashid agreed. But it's also what makes us better. Each failure teaches us something. Each disagreement shows us a perspective we missed. Each compromise makes us think harder about what really matters. Chin stood and joined them. High Arbiter, can I tell you what I've learned this week? Zelphine nodded. I came into this council absolutely certain I knew the right approach to Epsilon 7. No mining, protect the environment, period. My certainty was 95%. Chen's voice softened. But Rashid taught me about security. Amara taught me about economic consequences. Yuki taught me about individual liberty. And Dimitri taught me about systematic thinking. I'm still passionate about environmental protection. That hasn't changed. But I'm no longer certain my initial answer was the only right one. So you have become less certain? Zelphine asked. No, Chin said firmly. I've become more wise. Certainty and wisdom aren't the same thing. The words seemed to hit Zelphine like a physical force. Her panels flickered rapidly, processing this concept. Certainty and wisdom are not the same thing, she repeated slowly. Consensus and correctness are not the same thing. Now you're getting it, Kiran said. Zelphine turned to her fellow Synthari observers. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, panels pulsing in individual patterns. Then Zelphine did something unprecedented. She disagreed with her fellow council members. I believe, she said, her voice solo and uncertain but growing stronger, that we should consider revising our consensus protocols. Not abandoning them but adapting them. To allow for faster decisions with built-in adjustment mechanisms. The other Synthari stared at her in shock. That is, dissent, one of them whispered. Yes, Zelphine said. It is. And it is uncomfortable. And I am uncertain. But I am also curious. What would the Synthari be capable of if we embraced the possibility of being wrong? In that moment, Kiran knew they'd accomplished something extraordinary. They hadn't just shown the Synthari a different way to make decisions. They'd planted the seed of doubt in a species that had eliminated doubt for thousands of years. And sometimes doubt is the beginning of wisdom. The fracture. The news of Zelphine's descent spread through the Synthari Empire like a virus through perfect code. Within hours, the crystalline assembly on the Synthari homeworld had called an emergency session. Kiran received the diplomatic summons at 0300 station time. By 0400, he, Mara, and the entire Human Advisory Council were on a shuttle to the Synthari command ship that had appeared at the edge of confluent space. Did we break them? Yuki asked nervously as they approached the massive vessel. Its surface was covered in synchronized light patterns, but even from a distance, Kiran could see some patterns falling out of rhythm. I don't know, Kiran admitted. But we're about to find out. The Synthari command chamber was the largest room Kiran had ever seen. A vast amphitheater designed to hold the 720 council members of the full crystalline assembly. Every surface pulsed with bioluminescent light, creating a symphony of synchronized patterns that was both beautiful and overwhelming. Except now the patterns weren't quite synchronized. High Arbiter Supreme Valith stood at the center podium, his ancient form radiating authority. His panels pulsed in the old rhythm, perfect, mechanical, unified. But scattered throughout the chamber, Kiran could see pockets of council members whose patterns had broken free, pulsing in individual cadences. Ambassador Voss, Valith's voice boomed, harmonized with at least 500 of the council members. But 300 remained silent, their first act of individual choice in millennia. You have disrupted the unity. That was not our intention, Kiran began carefully. Was it not? Valith challenged. You brought chaos to our observer council. You demonstrated a system built on disagreement and compromise. You encouraged dissent. We demonstrated an alternative, Mara corrected, stepping forward. One option among many. And now our unity fractures. Velith's panels flared bright. Council member Zelfine has declared 47 points of dissent regarding our trade protocols. Council member Thrain questions our consensus timeline requirements. 17 others have begun voicing individual positions on matters we resolved decades ago. The harmony is breaking. Is that breaking? Rashid asked quietly, or waking up? The chamber erupted. Half the council's panels flashed in synchronized outrage. The other half pulsed in individual patterns of curiosity, fear, excitement, and confusion. Zelfine emerged from the crowd, her panels bright and unsynchronized. High Arbiter Supreme, I request permission to speak. You request. Velith's voice dripped with disbelief. You are a council member. You do not request, you harmonize with the consensus. I cannot harmonize with what I no longer fully support, Zelfine said, and her voice shook but held firm. I have observed the humans. I have calculated new probability matrices. And I have concluded that our consensus system, while providing stability, has created stagnation. Stagnation is preferable to chaos, another Elder Council member shouted. Is it? Thrain joined Zelfine. We spend years reaching decisions that the universe renders obsolete before we implement them. We achieved perfect consensus on the Tertian Corridor, 8 years too late. We unified on agricultural policy, and 3 million died. We harmonize on trade agreements, while other species forge ahead. We provide stability to the galaxy. Velith insisted. We provide inertia, Zelfine countered. And there is a difference. The chamber descended into chaos, or what counted as chaos for the Synthari. Council members began speaking in individual voices, their panels pulsing in discordant patterns. Arguments erupted. Ancient grievances surfaced. Questions that had been harmonized away decades ago resurfaced. It was, Kieran realized, the first real debate the Synthari had had in 3,000 years. Chin leaned toward Kieran. Should we be worried? Probably, Kieran admitted. But also, this might be exactly what they needed. Velith raised his hands, attempting to restore order. Enough. The humans have infected us with their disorder. Ambassador Voss, I demand you reverse this damage. I can't, Kieran said simply. And I wouldn't if I could. High Arbiter Supreme, you're asking me to unteach people how to think for themselves. That's not damage. That's growth. It is destruction of our unity. Your unity was already broken, Dimitri interjected, his analytical voice cutting through the noise. You simply hadn't admitted it yet. Every time you took 8 years to make a decision, that was evidence. Every time you avoided acting because you couldn't reach 100% certainty, that was evidence. Every catastrophic failure you rationalized away because it came from perfect consensus, all evidence. We are not on trial here, Velith declared. Aren't you though? Amara asked gently. High Arbiter Supreme, your own council members are questioning the system. Not because humans told them to, but because they observed an alternative and found it compelling. That's not infection, that's education. Yuki stepped forward, her usually confrontational demeanor softened by genuine empathy. Look, I get it. Your whole society is built on unity. The idea of giving that up must be terrifying. But you don't have to choose between chaos and consensus. That's a false binary. What alternative exists? Velith demanded. Structured disagreement, Rashid suggested. Debate protocols. Majority voting with minority protections. Time-limited consensus efforts that default to decision-making if full unity can't be reached. Compromise, Chin added. Not as a failure of consensus, but as a valuable tool in itself. Adaptive systems, Dimitri contributed. Make decisions with the best information available, implement monitoring systems, adjust as needed. Zelfine's panels brightened. A hybrid system. Synthari precision combined with human flexibility. Heresy, one of the Elder Council members shouted. But another voice rose from the crowd, Council Member Varix, whose age rivaled Velith's. Is it heresy? Or is it evolution? The chamber fell silent. Varix moved to the center, his ancient panels pulsing in a pattern that was both synchronized and individual, a rhythm Kieran had never seen before. I have served on this council for 417 years. I was present during the Great Famine. I voted for perfect consensus on the agricultural program that killed millions of our people. His voice carried the weight of centuries. We told ourselves it was an unforeseeable tragedy. But it was not. 3 council members had expressed concern about disease vulnerability. Minor concerns, Their certainty levels were only at 0.94 while the majority had reached 0.98. We harmonized away their doubts because we needed unity. Velith warned. No, Velith. They deserve to know. Varix turned to address the full chamber. Those 3 council members were right. Their uncertainty, their incomplete consensus, that was wisdom. And we silenced it for the sake of unity. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Panels flickered in confusion, anger, and realization. How many other times? Zelphine asked quietly. How many other decisions where minority concerns were valid but harmonized away? I have not calculated, Velith admitted, and for the first time, his voice was his alone. No harmony, no synchronization. Just one being confronting an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps, Mara suggested carefully, that would be a useful analysis to conduct. Velith looked at the human delegation, then at his own fractured council. For a long moment no one spoke. Then, slowly, deliberately, Velith's panels shifted to an individual rhythm. I propose, he said in his singular voice, that we conduct a comprehensive review of our consensus protocols. Not to abandon unity, but to examine whether our pursuit of perfect agreement has cost us effectiveness, adaptability, and wisdom. I second the proposal, Varric said immediately. As do I, Zelphine added. And I, Thrain agreed. One by one, council members voiced their support. Not in harmony. Not in unison. But in individual voices that somehow created a more complex, more beautiful chorus than the synchronized monotone that had come before. When the votes were counted, an unprecedented process requiring each member to state their position individually, 487 council members supported the review. 233 opposed. For the first time in recorded Synthari history, a decision had been made without consensus. The galaxy would never be the same. Velith looked at Kieran with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been terror, possibly both. Ambassador Voss, he said quietly, what have you done to us? Kieran smiled. We showed you that disagreement doesn't have to mean division. That compromise isn't weakness. That being certain you're right and actually being right are two different things. And now we must learn to navigate this uncertainty. Yes, Kieran agreed. Welcome to the beautiful, messy, complicated reality the rest of us live in. Is it always this uncomfortable? Usually, Mara said with a laugh. But it's also exhilarating. You'll see. As the Synthari Council began their first truly democratic debate in 3,000 years, Kieran watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension. They'd set out to teach the Synthari about compromise. Instead, they'd started a revolution. The new harmony. 6 months later, Kieran stood before the Galactic Confluence Assembly, preparing to witness something unprecedented. The Synthari Crystalline Council was about to present their revised Epsilon 7 mining recommendation, the same problem the Human Advisory Council had solved in 6 days. The Synthari had been working on it for 18 months before the human demonstration, and according to their old system, they would have needed at least another 6 months to reach perfect consensus. But things had changed. The Synthari delegation entered the chamber, led by High Arbiter Zelphine and High Arbiter Supreme Velith. Their bioluminescent panels pulsed in patterns that were neither perfectly synchronized nor completely individual, something new, something hybrid. Behind them came representatives from what was now being called the Loyal Opposition, a faction of Synthari who had chosen to maintain traditional consensus protocols while engaging with the reformers. The galaxy was still adjusting to the concept of Synthari factions. Distinguished delegates, Velith began, his voice clear and individual, the Synthari Crystalline Council presents our recommendation for Colony World Epsilon 7. He activated the holographic display and Kieran felt his jaw drop. The Synthari plan was brilliant, more comprehensive than the human proposal, yet more focused. It addressed every concern the Human Advisory Council had raised and several they hadn't considered. Environmental protocols were robust but flexible. Economic distribution was equitable but incentivized. Security measures were thorough but not oppressive. It was the work of minds that had learned to disagree productively. This proposal was developed over 37 standard days, Zelphine explained, utilizing a new decision-making framework we call structured dissent. Council members were encouraged to voice concerns and alternative viewpoints. Debates were time-limited but comprehensive. Voting occurred when consensus reached 85%, with monitoring systems built in to address the remaining 15% of uncertainty. Impressive, Ambassador Sethrak of the Dravix muttered. The rigid ones learned to bend. We did not merely bend, Velith corrected, his panels brightening. We evolved. We examined 400 years of decisions made under perfect consensus. We found that 47% of those decisions had required significant modification within 5 years of implementation. Perfect certainty, it seems, is often perfectly wrong. A murmur ran through the assembly. The Synthari were admitting systemic failure, something that would have been impossible under their old protocols. More importantly, Thrain added, we discovered that the dissenting voices we had harmonized away often contained critical insights. By creating space for disagreement, we found better solutions. Kieran caught Mara's eye. She was grinning like someone who'd just proven her doctoral thesis. However, Velith continued, and his tone grew more serious, we must acknowledge that this transition has not been without cost. The chamber quieted. 33% of our population has chosen to maintain traditional consensus protocols, Velith explained. They have formed what we now call the Unity Preservers. While we disagree on methodology, we remain one people. We are learning to coexist with different approaches. In other words, Zelphine said with what might have been the first Synthari smile Kieran had ever seen, we are learning what every other species has known for millennia, that diversity of thought is uncomfortable but valuable. The Dravix ambassador leaned forward. And what of your efficiency? Your legendary ability to function without conflict. Our efficiency in reaching decisions has increased by 412%. Dimitri's voice came from the human delegation section. He'd been working as a consultant with the Synthari Reform Committee. Their implementation success rate has improved by 67%. And their innovation rate has increased by 934%. The numbers spoke for themselves. But the Unity Preservers maintain that we have lost something precious. A new voice spoke up. Council member Varix approached the podium. They believe that our old harmony, our perfect synchronization, was the essence of what made us Synthari. And perhaps they are right. Kieran tensed. This could go poorly. We have lost something, Varix continued. We have lost the comfort of certainty. We have lost the peace of unified thought. We have lost the simplicity of one voice speaking for all. He paused, his panels pulsing in a complex pattern. But what we have gained is worth the cost. We have gained the ability to adapt, to question, to improve, to be wrong and to learn from it. We have gained wisdom. Varix turned to face the Unity Preservers delegation. My friends who choose the old way, I respect your choice. Your commitment to traditional values provides stability while we explore new methods. You are not wrong to preserve what worked for 3,000 years. But neither are we wrong to evolve. That, Mara whispered to Kieran, is a Synthari politician. They've invented politics. I'm not sure if that's progress or tragedy, Kieran whispered back. Both, Rashid said from behind them. Like most human innovations. The Human Advisory Council had been invited to observe the presentation as honored guests. Chin, Amara, Yuki, Dimitri, and Rashid sat together, watching their influence ripple through an ancient civilization. So what happens now? Yuki asked. Do the Synthari just become more human? No, Zelphine said, having approached their section during the presentation break. We become more Synthari. You showed us a method, but we are adapting it to our nature. Human democracy is chaotic and individualistic. Synthari democracy will be more structured, more collective. But it will be ours. And the Unity Preservers? Chen asked. They may prove to be our conscience, Zelphine admitted. Their insistence on thorough analysis and careful consensus keeps us from moving too fast, too recklessly. They are our opposition party. And we are learning that opposition can be loyal, can serve the same goals through different means. That's remarkably mature for a species that just invented disagreement 6 months ago, Amara observed. We have 3,000 years of cooperation to build upon, Zelphine replied. We simply redirected it. Instead of everyone thinking the same thoughts, we are learning to think different thoughts toward the same purpose. The presentation continued, with various Synthari Council members presenting different aspects of the Epsilon 7 proposal. But what struck Kieran most was watching them interact with each other, debating points, acknowledging concerns, building on each other's ideas. They looked like a functioning democracy. When the presentation concluded, the Galactic Confluence voted to accept the Synthari recommendation for Epsilon 7. It passed with 92% support, the highest approval rating for any proposal in Confluence history. As delegates began to file out, Velith approached the human delegation. Ambassador Voss, I must confess something, the High Arbiter Supreme said. When we first requested to observe your demonstration, I believed we would witness the inferiority of your chaotic methods. I intended to use your failure as evidence that our unity was superior. And instead, Kiran prompted. Instead, I witnessed the power of productive conflict, the strength in diverse perspectives, the wisdom in accepting uncertainty. Vailith's panels pulsed in a pattern that was uniquely his own. You did not teach us to be human, Ambassador. You taught us to be better Synthari. The student honors the teacher, Kiran said formally. Perhaps, Vailith replied. But the teacher also learns from the student. We have begun sharing our structured approach to your confluence. Already, 3 other species have requested to observe our structured descent protocols. Mara laughed. The Synthari are exporting their version of democracy. That's delicious irony. It is not irony, Thrain interjected, joining the conversation. It is synthesis. Humanity showed us that disagreement can be productive. We are showing the galaxy that productivity can be structured. Together, perhaps we improve the entire Confederation's decision-making processes. From perfect unity to structured descent to galactic democracy, Dimitri mused. The cascade effect is fascinating. It's also terrifying, Yuki pointed out. We came here to negotiate a trade route. Instead, we accidentally started a political revolution that's spreading across multiple species. Does that concern anyone else? Constantly, Kiran admitted. But would you take it back? They all looked at Zelphine, whose panels now pulsed with vibrant, individual life, so different from the synchronized monotone of 6 months ago. Never, Chin said firmly. Some things are worth the risk. Rashid nodded. Change is always scary. But stagnation is scarier. And sometimes, Amara added, the right thing and the scary thing are the same thing. 3 weeks later, Kiran finally received the authorization he'd been waiting for. The Synthari Crystalline Council had approved humanity's trade route through the Tertian Corridor. The decision had taken 41 days from initial proposal to final approval, not the 6 months originally projected, and not the 4 years under the old system. 41 days of debate, compromise, and structured dissent. The vote had been 63% in favor, 37% opposed. And for the first time in Synthari history that was enough. Kiran stood in his office on Confluence Station, looking out at the stars where the Synthari Empire spread across 12 systems. Somewhere out there, ancient beings were learning to disagree. Traditional councils were splintering into factions. Perfect unity was fracturing into beautiful diversity. Mara entered without knocking, a habit she developed during the long nights of the Human Advisory Council project. You know, the Draviks are calling it the Voss upheaval, she said, pulling up a datapad. There are academic papers being written about how one human ambassador accidentally reformed a 3,000-year-old civilization. I didn't do it alone, Kiran protested. True. Chin, Amara, Yuki, Dimitri, and Rashid are getting their share of credit. The Human Advisory Council is being studied as a model for productive conflict resolution. She grinned. Congratulations. You've all become case studies. Wonderful. Every diplomat's dream. There's more. Mara's expression grew serious. The Unity Preservers have formally requested their own demonstration. They want to show that traditional consensus still has value. They're challenging the reformers to I guess you'd call it a democracy competition? Kiran laughed. The Synthari invented political parties and competitive elections in 6 months. Humanity took millennia. Well, humanity didn't have a convenient external example to learn from, Mara pointed out. But yes, they're evolving at a frightening pace. The question is, where does it end? Maybe it doesn't, Kiran suggested. Maybe that's the point. Perfect unity was an ending, a closed system. But compromise, dissent, evolution, those are processes. They don't end. They just keep going. The council had perfect unity, Mara quoted the title that journalists had given to their story, until we taught them compromise. And now they're teaching the galaxy, Kiran finished. The student becomes the teacher. Through his office window, a Synthari vessel passed by the station. Its hull patterns flickered in the new hybrid rhythm, not perfectly synchronized but harmonious in a deeper way. Individual voices creating a complex chorus. It was messier than the old unity. It was also more beautiful. Somewhere on that ship, Synthari were probably arguing about something. Debating. Disagreeing. Compromising. And in that disagreement, they were becoming something their ancestors could never have imagined. A democracy. Kiran raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to the beautiful chaos of free thought, then turned back to his desk. There were new proposals to review, new negotiations to prepare for, new civilizations to potentially revolutionize. Just another day in the galactic confluence. Just another day teaching the universe that the best solutions often come from the hardest conversations. Just another day proving that perfect unity was never perfect at all. 5 years later, the galactic confluence had changed. Gone were the days of single-voice species declarations. Now, delegations came with internal disagreements, factional representatives, and minority opinions built into their presentations. The Synthari Crystalline Council had split into 7 major philosophical factions and 14 minor ones, yet somehow accomplished more in 5 years than they had in the previous 500. The Unity Preservers maintained their traditional consensus approach, but even they had adopted time-limited decision-making protocols. Perfect unity or not, the universe wouldn't wait. And Earth? Earth had finally been granted Tier 2 status in the Confederation, not despite humanity's tendency to disagree but because of it. Ambassador Kieran Voss stood before a new class of human diplomats, sharing the story of the Human Advisory Council and the revolution it had sparked. So remember, he told them, when you encounter a species that seems too unified, too certain, too perfect, show them the power of doubt. Teach them that disagreement can be productive. Demonstrate that compromise isn't weakness. A young cadet raised her hand. Sir, what if they don't want to learn? Kieran smiled, thinking of Zelphine's first tentative question, Vailitha's reluctant evolution, Varix's brave confession. Then you wait, he said. Because eventually the universe teaches everyone the same lesson. Perfection is static, growth is messy, and the most beautiful harmonies come from many voices singing different parts. Even if those voices are arguing? Another cadet asked. Especially then, Kieran replied. Because the path from chaos to consensus, that messy, frustrating, beautiful journey, that's where all the best ideas live. The cadets filed out, eager to find their own civilizations to revolutionize. Kieran looked out at the confluence, at the hundreds of species learning to balance unity with diversity, consensus with dissent, tradition with evolution. The council had perfect unity, he thought. And we taught them something better. We taught them to be perfectly, beautifully, productively imperfect. We taught them to be free.